Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to share with you some of my favorite fantasy books. Fantasy is a genre that has become increasingly difficult for me to find good books in, so it is my hope that by sharing this list you will find some books that don't suck, and maybe you'll agree with me that they're actually pretty good. The first book on this list is one most of you have probably already heard of, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is the only book I've ever bought because of hype, and it was probably the only book that's ever lived up to the hype. If you're not familiar with this book, the premise is that there are 6 teenagers who are tasked with carrying out a heist to break into a high-security prison called the Ice Court, which has never been successfully infiltrated before. Upon my second reading of this book, I didn't like it as well as I did the first time around. It was mostly the banter that I didn't like, but I would say 90% of banter I don't enjoy in books anyway. But what this book does well, it really does well, and that is the world building and the characterization. The world building is the world that we're introduced to in the Grisha trilogy, which took place before this book came out. It doesn't really matter what order you read them in. You should probably read the Grisha trilogy first, but I read Six of Crows first and then went back to the Grisha trilogy. But this book takes the world that we're introduced to in the Grisha trilogy and expands it even further. It's very real, very complex. It feels like a real place. And then we have the characterization. The characters' backstories are so well developed. You understand where they're coming from, why they feel the way they do, what they want, and that makes the characters very relatable, very realistic. Even though they're all really criminals of one sort or another, you end up rooting for them simply because you understand what they've been through, what they've gone through, and how they got to where they are now. The next book on this list is The Bone Maker by Beth Durst, and if you watched my bookstore video, I've already talked about this book a little bit, but for those of you that didn't watch it, I'll recap briefly. The Bone Maker is about 5 heroes who defeated the evil necromancer Eklor 25 years ago. The main character, Krea's husband, perished in the last battle, and she's been using bones to bring him back to life for short periods at a time ever since. She can only bring her husband back to life for short periods at a time because bones are rare. After Eklor was defeated, all of the bones are destroyed after a person dies because they don't want people doing what Eklor did and using the bones to bring people back to life to create undead abominations. But there is one place where Krea can get a lot of bones, and that is the battlefield where they defeated Eklor. After the battle was over, the battlefield was walled off and nobody can go in there, so it's basically perfectly preserved and there are lots of bones for Krea to use. She and a friend of hers sneak into there to get the bones, her friend reluctantly agreeing to help her, but while they're there they uncover evidence that Eklor may not actually be defeated as they all thought. This book is amazing. The world building is unlike anything I've ever seen before. There's this valley with these monsters in it that nobody wants to go in that kind of reminds you of Jurassic Park, and then you've got cable cars powered by magic and this city full of giant statues. But it's the characters that really did this book for me. It is the characters that I couldn't stop thinking of. They're so well fleshed out. They're relatable. I kept thinking about them, and that's why this book has earned a place on the shelf. Next on the list we have Race the Sands, also by Beth Durst. This book is absolutely phenomenal. I cannot say enough good things about this book. This book takes place in the world of Bakar, where who you are in this life will determine what you come back as in your next life. If you're a good person, then you can be reincarnated as a human. You might come back as a good animal, but if you are a terrible person, you will come back as a Keyhawk, which is a monster, and you will stay a Keyhawk forever unless you can win the Bakaran races. Our main character, Tamra, is a trainer. She's currently training the children of wealthy elites how to ride Keyhawks, and she's in desperate need of money, or else the local temple will take her daughter away from her. But in order to get enough money to prevent that from happening, she needs to find and train a rider that can win. And that brings us to our next main character, Raya. She is 17 years old and she has run away from her family because they are forcing her to marry this dude that is really a bad guy, and she doesn't want that for herself, so she runs away. But in order to be independent of her family, she'll need to have financial security of her own, and the only way that she can get enough money is to win the Bakaran races. This book is so incredibly original. I've never read anything like it before. The world building is complex, it's detailed, it feels like a real place, and the fact that it takes place in a desert is even better. I love stories that take place in the desert, in fantasy worlds. The belief system is explained in a way that makes it easy to understand. You understand why this is so important to these people, why it's so important for people to look after their souls, because it very much affects what they come back as in the next life. Our 2 main characters, Tamra and Raya, are strong and determined and very relatable, And the stakes in this book could honestly not be higher. Things are difficult for these characters, they are not given anything, they have to work for it every inch of the way, and even the more minor characters that you're introduced to are given big roles in this story because it's told in third-person point of view, so we get to see scenes from their point of view and understand what they're up to and why they feel the way that they do and how they got here, and it makes you start to care for these characters that you may not have liked originally, but you do definitely care for some of these side characters by the end. So I cannot say enough good about this book. Please read it. It is amazing and honestly I think very underrated. Next we have The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. This is the first book in the Bardugo trilogy. In this world, in this version of England, there are magicians who summon beings like genies to do their work for them. They basically do magic through the beings that they summon, and our main character Nathaniel is like this magician prodigy. He's 11 years old. He is frustrated with the pace of his teaching, so he decides, I'm going to teach myself, and he finds the name of a genie, Bartimaeus, and summons him, but summoning Bartimaeus and controlling him are two different things. Nathaniel has been publicly humiliated by a much more experienced magician named Simon Lovelace, and he summons Bartimaeus to carry out revenge against this magician for humiliating him, and he wants Bartimaeus to steal Lovelace's treasure, which is the Amulet of Samarkand. Honestly, what makes this book so amazing is Bartimaeus himself. He is sarcastic, he is witty, is exactly my kind of humor, and I think you will find him equally as hilarious as I do. The next book we have is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I have to admit, I did not like the last book in this series, but the good news is that you can read this first book as a standalone because of the way that it ends. It kind of leaves things open to interpretation. You can imagine whatever ending for the characters that you like. The premise of this book is our main character, Leigh, is a scholar. Her people have been oppressed by the Empire for ages, and her brother is kidnapped in a raid and sent to prison, and now she is recruited by the Resistance as a spy in exchange to get her brother out of prison. So she agrees to spy for the Resistance, which is a very dangerous job because they have her spy on the commandant of Blackcliff Academy, who is this vicious, cruel person. She very much succeeds in this awful villain character that you just love to hate, which is always nice. And the other main character, Elias, is a soldier in training at Blackcliff. He is meant to serve the Empire, but he's not certain that that's what he wants. And then Leigh and Elias meet each other, and she helps him realize that maybe there's a different path for him to take besides what he's been taught his whole life is what he's meant to be. I did quite enjoy this book, despite not enjoying the end of the series. Each of the characters are likable, and I love stories about evil empires, so this is definitely right up my alley, and if you enjoy stories about evil empires as well, I think you'll enjoy this one. Next up we have The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd-Jones. In The Bone Houses, the main character Rin is a gravedigger and she's struggling to provide for her family, but the dead don't always stay dead, and sometimes they come back as the Bone Houses, which are these reanimated bodies that are attacking villages and causing havoc. And then an apprentice mapmaker named Ellis comes into the village, and for some reason his presence sets these bone houses off and they start to go crazy, and there's more of them appearing. And so Ellis and Rin set off to try to find the secret behind the bone houses. Where do they come from? What do they want? And why do they seem so interested in Ellis? This book is based on Welsh mythology, I believe, and it's a very simple story, but I think that's why it works so well, and I just honestly loved it. It's a little bit creepy, but it's not like horrifying or anything like that. Rin is a very fierce character. She wields an axe. I believe, if I remember correctly, I read this book a while back, I believe Ellis struggles with chronic illness or chronic pain, so that's represented in this book very well. This world is just one where you want to spend more time in, and I appreciated the introduction to a part of Welsh mythology that I really didn't have a lot of knowledge of. If you've seen the Black Cauldron movie, the Disney one, I think it has something to do with the Black Cauldron myth. This book is definitely better than the Black Cauldron movie. Moving on, we have Fireborne by Rosaria Munda. This book has dragons in it, and that's why I bought it, I will be honest. Unfortunately, the dragons in this story do not talk. They're just beasts that are ridden by the characters, but this book more than makes up for that with the characters themselves. This book takes place in the aftermath of a revolution where the rebels succeeded, they took over, and they're in charge now, but the defeated elites of the old world are regrouping, and so it's up to this new generation of dragon riders who are teenagers to prepare to defend their world from the old elites who want to fight and take it back. Our two main characters, Annie and Leigh, are both orphans. Annie comes from a lowborn family and her family was executed by dragonfire, and Leigh's family was actually a member of the aristocratic elite that was overthrown, and they were executed when the rebels won. But there are members of Leigh's family who are still alive, and they are working to try to take back the city that they lost in the revolution, and he needs to decide if he's going to support the rebels and everything that he's come to believe in, or if he's going to side with the only family he has left. And then Annie is forced to choose between her friendship with Leigh. Is she going to stay loyal to him? Is she going to help him no matter what he chooses? Or is she going to step up and be the champion that her new people need? There are 3 books in this trilogy. As of the filming of this video, the 3rd one has not yet been released, but I'm eagerly awaiting it. I want to see how the author chooses to end this series. The conflict in the series is very real. The characters are forced to make decisions that are very difficult, and I love it when characters are forced to make difficult decisions. There is no good answer here. There's going to be a cost no matter what you decide. These are really high stakes, and they mean something. Next up, we have The Cry of the Icemark by Stuart Hill. This is a book I read when I was in elementary school. I was really young, but I remember loving this book, and then recently I decided to buy a copy of it and read it as an adult and see if it lived up to what I remembered of it, and it did. In this book, the Icemark Kingdom is being attacked by this empire that's based off of the Roman Empire, and General Scipio Bellorum, who is thus far undefeated, is coming to the small northern kingdom to take them over and add them to his already long list of conquests. And the only thing standing in his way is the Icemark and its army, which is led by the main character Theron's father. Unfortunately, the Icemark are too small to stand up to Bellorum's army, and Theron's father falls in battle, so it's up to her to assume the role of queen, and she's going to have to find allies to help her defeat Bellorum. But that means forming an alliance with groups that have hated the Icemark for centuries, including the werewolves and the vampires. This book has a little bit of everything in it. It has witches, it has warlocks, it has forest druid-like beings, like they're made of the forests, the holly and oak kings. We've got Amazon-like women, we've got empires, giant armies, battles, werewolves, vampires, and the best of all, in my opinion, giant talking snow leopards. And somehow this book brings it all together and makes it work. There are passages in this book that are a little bit slow, where they're journeying to meet who they hope to ally themselves with next. One of the things that this book does well that I really appreciate is Theron is a young queen who has suddenly the burden and responsibility of ruling a kingdom, especially in a time of war, thrust upon her, and she deals with that very well, but there are passages where she doubts herself, and I feel like that's realistic, obviously, and I don't think that there are enough instances in books where the main characters doubt themselves. They cannot be immediately, instantly good at everything. And Theron isn't. She can't win this war alone. She can't lead her people to victory alone. She needs the support of these allies. If she can't convince them to fight on her side, all is lost and the Empire wins. So yes, I was very happy that this book lived up to my expectations. It was as good as I remembered it as a child, and honestly, this cover is just gorgeous. I mean, look at that. And last but definitely not least, we have The High House by James Stoddard. This, in my opinion, is the most underrated book I have ever come across in my life. The premise of this book is that Carter, the main character, grows up in the High House as a little boy where his father is the master. And the High House is this huge, sprawling mansion in which multiple different worlds are contained within, each with its own citizens, its own politics, its own conflicts, but not all of the people who inhabit the High House are benevolent. And Carter steals his father's ring of keys one day and loses it in the Room of Horrors to one of these malevolent beings. So his father then sends him away for his own safety, and his father then sets off on a quest to try to recover the keys, but he never returns. The book then fast forwards that when Carter is an adult, he returns to the High House. His father has not returned. He is missing. Nobody knows what happens to him. So Carter decides to set out to find his father and reclaim the keys from this malevolent demon devil-like being that took them when he was a child. This book is incredibly creative. The idea of this massive house with all these different worlds contained within is so original. It was amazing reading this when I was younger because I wished that I had grown up in a place like the High House with all of these rooms to explore. Aside from demon-like beings and all of these countries and fantasy worlds contained within the house, there is also a dragon in the attic who is snarky and sarcastic, and I just love his character so much. As with the Icemark, there are some passages in this book that are a bit on the slow side. Carter is forced to journey from one kingdom to the next in his search for his father, but if you don't mind slower paced scenes, the journey that you go through in this book is definitely worth it in the end, and I encourage everybody to read it. So that is it! We got through all 9 books. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. I upload every week. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!